Howdy, welcome to Rock and Roll Confessional. Hello, Rita Wild.
Hey there, buddy. How are you?
Man, we're doing good. The heat wave's done in California for now, and we're just kind of getting ready for fall and having fun, right?
Actually, it's going to come back this weekend for us.
It's little. It's not going to be in the hundreds, though.
Yeah, that's true. That one Saturday, I don't know about you, but on my phone, it said 104 in Long Beach. And another friend of mine in Long Beach had it recorded at 107, but I heard the record was 108 in Long Beach. Somebody recorded that somewhere.
All I can tell you, it was the day that we officially were confirmed that our air conditioner went out. So it really didn't matter. The brand new air conditioner went out. So anyway. Well,
not good. This show is with Bill German. He's an author and I just love this interview. I love this book. Bill German, for many years, wrote, researched, and published his fanzine for the Rolling Stones Beggars Banquet. And it led to him hanging out with members of the band for over 17 years. He was invited to parties with Keith and Woody, went on tour with the band, and so much more. He wrote a book a few years ago, which has been updated for the 60th anniversary of the Rolling Stones this year. It's such a great book.
The new version includes updated information, including an interview that Bill did with one of the original members, Ian Stewart. The book is titled Under Their Thumb, How a Nice Boy from Brooklyn Got Mixed Up with the Rolling Stones. And the new edition is available at Amazon. So here we go. Let's do it. It's time for an interview with Bill German.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Bill. We appreciate having you on Rock and Roll Confessional. And I've got to admit that your book, Bill German's Under Their Thumb, How a Nice Boy from Brooklyn Got Mixed Up with the Rolling Stones and Lived to Tell About It, is like my favorite book now. I love this book. And it's like, to me, it's kind of the book equivalent, the movie equivalent would be Almost Famous by Cameron Crowe. And Cameron Crowe was actually a subscriber to your Beggars Banquet magazine.
Yes, he was. I would deposit those checks every year. He would send me the $6 or whatever I was charging every year. And it was a great honor because I was already a big fan of his. And I would have comped him, he didn't know that, or he didn't care. But that was a real thrill.
Oh, that's awesome.
So wait, you have his home address, is what you're saying?
I do.
From the checks.
I won't put it out there in public, but yes.
Okay.
I don't
you
know.
Can share it with us.
Going back a few years, but...
Yeah. Well, this book is pretty amazing. I think anybody who's a fan of any band, this is their story. But it's your story. And you were just a teenager in high school. You were taking some journalism classes, maybe thinking about doing journalism, but your sister turned you on to the Rolling Stones. You love their music. And then why don't you tell the story? You started this fanzine and then you're friends with, the Rolling Stones. My God, I pinch myself every day.
Yeah, well, so I was like a news junkie before that phrase even existed. My dad used to bring home all 3 daily newspapers in New York because it cost like 25 cents to buy all 3. This is going back to the 1970s. And so I just became a news junkie, and I would be the kid that would watch Walter Cronkite. I was that nerd. But at the same time, I fell in love with the Stones, and that started when I was 10 years old because I heard my sister playing Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. And so I just became this, incredible Stones fan and big time, journalism fan. And when I turned 16, I figured literally the week I turned 16 in September 1978, I figured I would marry the 2 hobbies by starting this fanzine. And in the late 70s, it was still, the punk rock, do-it-yourself ethic. There were a lot of punk rock fanzines out there that I would see at all the record stores here in Greenwich Village. And I just said, I'm going to do one of these about the Stones, and I had no real experience. And, those early issues looked horrible, of course, and the writing was horrible. But as I like to tell people, they smelled great because I mimeographed to print.
Oh, yeah.
by sneaking into my high school's mimeograph room. A friend of mine had the keys, and so he would be able to sneak me in there. And so the first year of issues, which I did every month faithfully, were printed on mimeograph at my high school in Brooklyn.
That's with the purple ink?
Well, okay, we're getting into the weeds here, but technically, that is Rexograph. The purple ink is Rexo, and the black ink is Mimeo. But they both smelled great, mind you.
Yeah.
That was great. Now, how did you start distributing that? Because obviously it was a lot of work. I mean, it was cut and paste the normal way, the actual way of cutting and pasting it and putting it together, and glue. Well, that explains everything.
I mean, kids today, they don't understand, cut and paste, you just click, a mouse and it's all done for you. But you really had to be dedicated to put out a fanzine back then. Because just to lay out a whole page, to type and then to lay out a page with photos and graphics, it could take you a whole day just to do one page. But anyway, so I would print them in my high school's mimeograph room after hours, and then I would try to sell copies to my classmates who were not interested, because I was just trying to get like 25 cents an issue. But they were not interested because, let's not forget, this is the late 70s in Brooklyn. And everyone was into Saturday Night Fever, and all the guys thought they were Tony Manero, and all the girls wanted to date guys that looked like Tony Manero. So, I would go up to my classmates and, hey, you want a copy of my fanzine? 25 cents. Like, what the hell is this? So I had my readership was zero for the first half a year at least. And then the great irony is, who becomes my biggest readers? The Stones themselves.
I know, that is just so amazing. Now, how did that happen? Did I know?
How'd they get the copy?
Yeah.
Right. Well, so the thing is, if luck plays a role in my story, it's location, location, location. So I'm living in Brooklyn, and I am just a subway ride away from Manhattan across the East River, where 3 of the Stones are living at this point in the late 70s. So you have Mick, Keith, and Ronnie Wood, or as everyone called him, Woody. And so they were going out to nightclubs every night, and very often getting up on stage and jamming with some old blues guys or some reggae guys, or even new wave and punk people, like Jim Carroll. They're getting up, Keith is on stage with his people who died. So there's always something going on, and I was reporting about that. And then I also found out, and these were clubs that at the time I couldn't even get into because I was underage. I'm 16, 17 years old. So I can't even get into most of these clubs, but I knew, quote unquote, grown-ups who were getting into these clubs. And they would report to me, and I would put it all in the fanzine. And then I found out that the Stones were having a party at a nightclub called Danceteria. And it was an afternoon party to promote their Emotional Rescue album. And so now it's June of 1980. I'm 17 years old, and I had just graduated from high school 2 days earlier. And I show up to this party. I'm not on a guest list, but I figured this is where I can finally meet the Stones and just hand them a copy of my latest fanzine. So I wait for them to come out of this party. Mick comes out first and gives off a vibe don't come near me. He doesn't actually say it, but that's just the vibe you pick up from him. Yeah, don't come near me. And he just goes right into his limo drives off. But then Keith and Woody come out, and, and Keith is like the opposite, and he wants to shake hands and, sign autographs, and so they were very approachable. And at this point, because of the limos parked outside of the nightclub, and at this point, it's 5 p.m. So people are getting out of work, and they see these limousines, in front of Danceteria for this press party, and people are getting curious, what's going on? And here comes Mick Jagger, who doesn't stop to talk to anybody. Here comes Keith Richards and Ron Wood, who do stop to talk to everybody. And at that moment, Keith was surrounded by a bunch of people. So I said, hey, I'm going to go over to Woody, and I will present him with my latest issue, like a process server. And I'm only 17 years old, and it's hey, Woody, here's the latest issue of my fanzine. And, I figure he was just amusing me, just, humoring me. He says, yeah, real nice, but then he has a chance to look at it for like a second because Keith isn't getting into the limo yet. And he looks at it and he sees that I do have like some exclusive stuff in there about their upcoming album. And he starts asking me, like, hey, how do you get that? Album just came out today. And I said, oh, well, I work really hard on this, blah, blah, blah. And he and Keith get into the limo. And for some reason, the window was rolled down in the back of the limo. And I could see Keith like elbowing Woody. And like, what the hell is that, man? And Woody points to me and, from my lip reading, Woody says something like, that kid over there, he just gave it to me. And they smile and they drive away. And that starts the whole thing. Wow. And what I didn't realize at the time is that moment of me handing Woody the issue of my fanzine was photographed by a paparazzi photographer who was just standing there on the street. And I used it as the cover of my book. And you can see Keith in the foreground with a pilfered bottle of Jack Daniels.
Yep.
Surprise.
Surprise. He'd been nowhere without his best friend, Jack. But in the background, you see me, 17-year-old me, handing the issue to Ronnie Wood, and the rest of Ronnie Wood is cut out of the picture, but you can see his hands reaching out for it. And I just thought that would make the perfect photo for the cover for various reasons, because that's what started everything. My relationship with the Stones literally started at that moment, my personal relationship with them, as well as the fact that it really captures the Stones' accessibility in New York City, that a teenage kid really could meet the Rolling Stones on the streets of New York. And that's something that I just don't think can happen, 40 plus years later. But it did at that point in the late 70s, early 80s. That's how accessible the Stones were.
It was before John Lennon got shot too, wasn't it?
Excellent point. Right. Yeah. Right. So this is June of 1980, and the Stones are, just walking the streets without bodyguards. Mind you, even after John, they were still very accessible, and I give them credit for that because, one of the things I say early on in the book is, here are the Stones walking the streets of New York and pressing the flesh, very easily. Whereas you have other bands like Led Zeppelin, I don't mean to pick on Led Zeppelin. I love it. But I'm saying, other bands that are like, or at least project the image that they're, in their castle, surrounded by a moat and they're hanging out with the Grim Reaper guy or whatever, and just giving off a very different vibe as opposed to the Stones, who seemed very vital at the time. And, they weren't going to let grass grow under their, feet. And they're hanging out with punk rock stars, at the time.
So, for an average fan, just to have that moment of handing that to Woody and then saying something to Keith, that would be enough. But then you go on and they say that they read your magazine to find out what everybody else is doing. I love that. How did you become part of the inner sanctum, as it were?
Well, so after that fateful day, I started bringing issues to their office every month. And they would always say to me, the people at their office would say, oh, we're passing it over to the Stones. And I was never sure, I'm a naive teenager, but even so, I'm like, they're probably not. So I hedged all my bets. And whenever I would find out like what hotel Keith was staying at, because even though he was based in New York, he would like jump from hotel to hotel and from apartment to apartment. And then also I knew where Mick lived. At that point, he was living on Central Park West, just a block away from John and Yoko at the Dakota. So Dakota is 72nd and Central Park West. Mick was living at 73rd and Central Park West. So every time I came out with a new issue, I would, go up there and leave it with the doorman, try to sound very official. Like, the doorman has no idea that I'm just a teenager who's barely shaving at this point, And I would say, please see that Mr. Jagger receives this envelope. And the doorman would say, yeah, of course, But it turns out they really were passing the issues on to them because, I became of age and I was able to go to these nightclubs, which, it was kind of easy to predict where they would go. Obviously, Keith loves Chuck Berry. Keith loves Peter Tosh. Keith loves Toots and the Maytals. So when those bands are playing at a club like the Ritz, you show up, with a handful of your fanzines. And so what started to happen is I would just approach them and again say, hey, here's the latest issue of my fanzine. And he would say something like, I've already got this one. I just read it on the can. The Stones are reading my stuff in the bathroom.
Oh my God.
So it was very heady stuff for, at this point I'm 17, 18, 19.
Yeah.
And so it just like kept snowballing from there. And then, the fact that the Stones are reading the fanzine means that the people in their office, want to help me even more. And so it was just like this, like I said, this great snowball effect of everyone just, liking the fanzine and wanting to help me.
At this age, Bill, what were you thinking was going to come out of this? Were you thinking, I'm going to get an interview with one of them? What?
That was, like the goal, but to borrow the Stones title, I had no expectations, really. I had no idea what to expect. But obviously, that was a big goal of mine. I was, a big time reader of, Rolling Stone magazine, Cream magazine, Circus magazine. And it's like, those magazines get to interview the Stones. Why can't my little fanzine interview them? And so my first interview with a Rolling Stones member or semi-member was in 1981. I get a phone call from, someone at Rolling Stones Records, their office, saying, do you want to interview Ian Stewart, one of the founding members and the piano player for the Stones? And I jump at the chance. At that point, I'm 18 years old. And so that was my big get at the time.
Sure.
And then I just knew at some point I will, or I had better, interview one of the real band members, one of the primary members. And eventually that did happen after a while.
I love the fact that the book came out actually several years ago, 2009, I think it was, but you've re-released it for the 60th anniversary of the Stones, and included in that is your interview with Ian Stewart, which is lovely.
Yeah. He was obviously not the most famous of the Stones band members, but he was a founding member, and that's the interview that I get asked about the most. I've interviewed them all except for Charlie. But I interviewed Mick, I interviewed Keith a bunch of times, I interviewed Woody a bunch of times, I interviewed Bill Wyman a couple of times, even Mick Taylor. But the one that people asked me about, because it's so rare, was my Ian Stewart interview. So I decided to reprint that in this new edition of the book. And then also I kind of added, like an epilogue to the epilogue, sort of the afterword, I guess you can call it. To answer two questions that I get asked about the most since the book originally came out. And like you said, it originally came out in 2009 in hardcover. And the question that I always get asked whenever I do public appearances is, hey, Bill, what do the Stones think of your book? And are you still in touch with them? So I take, like 20 or 30 pages to answer those two questions with a bunch of stories.
Some great stories.
So, thank you.
Great stories and characters. Oh my God. It's what I'm going to ask about, but we'll get to that later. But I mean, you're not only just meeting up with them and stuff, they're inviting you to their apartments, to their houses. I mean, you're like, hanging out with them. You're talking music with them. They trust you with everything.
Going to anniversary and birthday parties.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Christmas parties, because Keith's birthday and his wedding anniversary is right around Christmas. So they would invite me to like that big holy trinity of celebrations. And when they would open the door, I would just say, happy everything. It's birthday, Keith and Patty's wedding anniversary, it's Christmas. But yeah, so they would invite me to all these things. And even like non-Stones related things. Patty Hansen would invite me to parties for her hairdresser, and yeah, like you said, they trusted me. And I realized that it started that day that is on the cover of the book, the photo, because everybody else, was taking stuff from them. Everyone else wanted an autograph or a handshake or a photo with them. And not me. That very first day I met them, I was giving them something. And that continued on for years and years and years, where I wasn't taking, I was only giving. And if anything came my way from them, then that was gravy. I was really just always giving. And it took me like to my adulthood, like only recently did that start occurring to me. Like I was always giving them something. And then eventually they started giving back to me without me ever asking for any favors. And so they started giving back to me in the sense of, hey, Bill, why don't you come to my birthday party at the Limelight? Or Keith and Mick, I have a story in there about going to Mick's big birthday party here in New York in 1985 when the Stones weren't really talking to each other, but Mick invites me to his birthday party. And yeah, it just, it was just this beautiful thing, just like this cycle, of events that just kept happening. And then, it culminates with them, telling their business partners to like get this kid, Bill German, to do, our official fanzine. And so my little fanzine that I started in my pajamas and printed out of my high school's mimeograph room is suddenly the Rolling Stones official newsletter, advertised in their Undercover album. And it just goes at like a crazy pace, that I could never have anticipated. I mean, it wasn't even a dream come true in the sense that I don't think I dreamed this much.
Yeah. It's like, how could you dream something like this? It'd never come true, but it did. So many interesting things, in the book that you talk about. They're really close with you. They're saying stuff to you that they're not going to tell another journalist. They're
another
not
band member.
Yeah. Karen, not Karen.
Brenda.
Brenda. Brenda. But, to get that close and keep your integrity, because you didn't partake in any of the cocaine or any of, how did you do that? What resilience did you have? Or is it just your ethic?
Well, I think part of it is my ethic and my upbringing. I just, was lucky, I guess, to have that kind of family where there were no real addictions and things. We had other problems like but which is the subject of my next book, by the way.
Good.
But so, yeah, maybe it starts with that. But really, the bigger point, and it might sound corny, but hanging with the Stones, that was the high for me. That's the childhood dream. Like, how much higher could I get than like hanging out in Keith Richards' house or Ron Wood's house or, Mick Jagger's house. So when the drugs got passed around, like I didn't need it. Partly I wanted to remember it all, on a personal level, as well as for the fanzine, because if they're giving me information, if I'm sitting in Keith's hotel room or house, and he's saying, oh, yeah, the new album comes out on, whatever date, and, we're going to give it this working title right now, that it's like, wow, this is all fodder for the fanzine. I must remember all this stuff. So I want to stay sober, so it's on that level, journalistically. And then, like I said, personally, I want to remember it all. And then, of course, there's the other part of it, which is like, these guys are professional drug takers. And boozers.
True.
And, and I'm scared that I'm going to be the one that turns purple and, and drops dead on the floor. And it's just another one of those stories. That's the front page of the papers, teenage kid dies in Keith Richards' hotel room or something. So, so there was fear, there was, a whole bunch of different things going on as far as me not doing the drugs with them. And it was easy for me to pass it up, but I speak personally and I'm not, I never got preachy to anybody. And of course, there were other people in the room. There were some really interesting characters when you hang out with Keith and Woody. But there were other people in the room who were like, hey, hey, Keith, what's the deal with this guy? What is he, a narc? And, and they would come to my defense. Bill's just here to interview me. And I...
You have that accent down.
I was going to say, you're doing quite well with the imitations.
Yeah.
You hang out with them enough, it kind of rubs off. I sometimes think of doing like a one-man show as Keith. I got to put that together someday.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome.
Off Broadway.
Yeah.
What I find interesting, Bill, is that you had such close relations with Keith and Woody, and yet you still had to go through the back door for every interview, and you still had to go through the new publicist to try to convince them that you deserved it, and you never took advantage of going straight to the artist, but you would, started over every time.
Yeah, and it was exhausting, and it's one of the reasons why I gave it up after 17 and a half years. It's just like too much. And the more corporate the Stones got, then yes, I added more layers of publicists and managers and lawyers. But yeah, the point is, I mean, it's kind of obvious, really, that Keith and Woody don't walk around with like backstage passes, or with the guest list for their parties. So yeah, you could be hanging out with them, and Woody says, come to my party tomorrow. But yeah, you still need to be put on the guest list because he's not going to do it, and Keith's not going to do it, and like I said, they're not walking around with backstage passes or anything. So you always had to go through some security guy or some manager or some publicist, for the most part. I mean, definitely like 1989 onwards, there was a point in the mid 80s where they were on the verge of breaking up. And so it really was, anarchy. They had like no management sort of in the mid 80s. So it was much easier. And I could just get on the phone and say, hey, Woody, I'm coming over to the house,
Yeah.
But then once they kind of reunited, for lack of a better phrase, in 1989, then all the extra layers got added to the equation.
And that was the Steel Wheels tour?
Steel Wheels tour, exactly.
Yeah. Which was great. I remember that coming out and thinking, everything seemed, just from a fan's point of view, seems so different and chaotic. And the fact that Budweiser's got this huge logo on every piece of print work, and it just seemed like they sold out. And I think you talk about them going from Bill Graham to
Michael Cole
in Canada for
right,
the $65 million deal that he put together.
Yeah. I mean, everything was for sale on that tour. Like everything, like even interviews with them. So they only did, like I think maybe just one radio interview. And it went to the highest bidder. It was packaged with their the audio simulcast of their pay-per-view. And you could buy the package for like $1 million. And, one big radio network, I don't know if I could say their name, but
you can say ABC.
ABC. Well, I mean, they all bid for it, all the big ones, Westwood One and DIR, they all bid for it. And ABC came in with an offer of like a little north of $1 million. And it's like, okay, ABC, you get to interview the Stones. You get the audio simulcast of their pay-per-view. And nobody else can interview them. I think they did maybe like one other that benefited them. I can't remember who, but maybe they did like 60 Minutes or somebody like that, But other than that, everything was put up for bids, and they had all the merchandising. They even had like an official transportation sponsor, like a bus company that, take you to the gigs. You show up to, the bus stop, and they will take you to the venue, to the stadium. And they, auction that off for like $1 million. Hey, bus companies, put in a bid. So everything was for sale on that tour.
Your book takes you through the romanticism of rock and roll, of just how much it touched individuals and how explosive it became. But then it takes that turn where you're talking now of just how corporate it became. One part in the book, you write in the Beggars Banquet newsletter that Mick stumbled out of a club or something like that, and they called you in about, you can't say that. We don't want him to think he's stoned or anything or drunk. My God.
Like I said, all these layers. And so there was a certain point for a few years where I was obligated to present them with the draft of my next issue every time I went to print. I had various like business relationships with the Stones, or different facets of the relationship. But there was a point for a few years where I had to submit my issues for their approval. And it wasn't just the band members, because like Keith and Woody, like they didn't really care. They were like, Bill, put whatever you want. We love it, and if you want to, be sarcastic, then that's fine, or make jokes about us, whatever. But Mick took a lot of this stuff seriously. And then their people took this stuff very seriously. And so I would hear it, right? So something as simple as the word stumbled, Keith stumbled out of some club at whatever hour, it was just like a turn of phrase. But right, Keith's management lady says, no, stumbled would imply Keith was stoned, and we don't want anybody to think that.
No. He never gives us that impression at all. Never.
They start telling me like what photos not to print. And with Mick, sometimes it was like just vanity. He didn't like the way he looked in a certain photo, or then there were things where like he felt that if I reported about something, it might reveal something about his personal life that he didn't want his girlfriend, Jerry Hall, to know about. I tell a story in the book about how I wrote about a party that the Stones were the guests of honor of in Mexico City. And I say all the Stones attended this party except for Mick. Well, no, don't like it. Change it. Why? Well, it turns out that Mick didn't attend this party because he was, pursuing something on the side, shall we say, while his girlfriend, Jerry Hall, was up here in New York, 7 months pregnant with their first child, and here's Mick running around. So, so I reworded it. I still wanted to write about the Stones attending this party. So instead of saying the Stones all attended except for Mick, I wrote, Keith and Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts and Ronnie Wood attended this party, period. When Jerry Hall reads about it, she can connect her own dots because I work for Mick. I don't work for Jerry Hall. So, there's those kinds of things. Bill Wyman did the same thing with me. I wanted to print a picture. He actually introduced me to his girlfriend here in New York. And
the young one?
The young one, well,
14.
They were all young. It's a matter of, are they young enough to be his granddaughter or young enough to be just his daughter? Delineate. But anyway, so no, but it was not Mandy Smith, if that's what you're referring to. That's who you're referring to. But it was some other woman named Kelly, and he introduced me to her at a party in New York, and there's a photo that's taken of the two of them, and I'm about to print it. Here's Bill with his girlfriend Kelly here in New York. And he's like, no, please don't print that photo, and don't print photos of me with anybody. And it's like, oh, okay. Because it turns out that Kelly was the New York girlfriend. And he didn't want the one in LA to find out about the one in New York. He didn't want the one in London to find out about the one in LA. And so just, best not to print photos of me with anybody. Okay, Mr. Wyman.
Now, Bill Wyman was a real, from what I understand, historian about the band. He would document everything. Did he ever help you or give you any comments, or other than don't print pictures of my girlfriends?
Well, I don't think we ever collaborated on anything. I'm trying to think. But we had a great respect for each other as archivists and historians. And he has everything, and obviously predating my time, I didn't start doing my stuff until the late 70s. And he had been at it since, the early 60s. So, he has everything, some of which he's put up for auction, some of which he put on display in his restaurant, which he no longer owns.
Sticky Fingers? Was that Sticky Fingers?
Sticky Fingers,
yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, he sold it a couple of years ago, and I think out of business completely now.
Bill, can you explain to us, Rita probably already knows this, but Ronnie is a member of the Stones, but he's not paid the same? Like he's actually hired for X amount of salary instead of percentage? Is that it?
I think, no, starting in the late 80s, he did finally get an equal cut. But
Okay.
for like the first 15 years or so, or undoubtedly like a dozen years, he was not. He was just a hired hand, similar to their backup musicians, including their bass player, Daryl Jones, who's
Right.
now been in the band longer than Bill Wyman, but is not considered an official band member, for financial reasons and for public relations reasons, and who knows what. But right. So Ronnie Wood was on a retainer for many years, but now he is an equal member, of everything that has happened since that time forward. So,
yeah, it was interesting because he was one of the few band members that got brought in and was on the retainer, but yet he was considered one of the Stones.
Yeah.
I
think some of that is just because, he resembled them so much, physically, musically, like even geographically, he's British. He was, he wanted to be a member of the Stones, like, in 1962, 63, when he first saw them. And so like they knew him and they felt comfortable with him. And, so they just kind of welcomed him in, as a fellow, Stone, as a brother,
The book is, like I said, a fascinating read, and you meet all these characters and you find out some interesting stuff about you. Like, you get to be around all these celebrities, but who is it that you go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It was a real journalist, Tom Snyder.
Oh, yeah. I know, it's crazy. And I know people make fun of Tom, sort of a caricature of himself, of course. But to me, right, like I said earlier, I was a news junkie. And so, at 6 o'clock or so, I'm watching Walter Cronkite. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, I am and this is as a teenager. I'm like 13, 14 years old. And I'm watching Tom Snyder. And I got such an education from watching that show. I'm not, being cute when I say that I think I learned more from his show than I did in school.
Oh, yeah.
Just about like, just civics and current events and things like that, which I don't think kids get taught now at all, but that's a whole separate conversation. But right, here's Tom Snyder, who, I don't know if you wanted to go down the Tom Snyder road, but just quickly, who used to have guests on that like had nothing to plug, and he has on politicians, he has on people, from like Jimmy Carter to Patti Smith to Charles Manson, to, French actresses. And, it was such an education for me as a teenager. So I just adored him. And right. So Keith is on Saturday Night Live in October of 1988. He had just come out with his solo album. And I get to go to the rehearsal as well as to the actual broadcast. And I look over to my side, and there is Tom Snyder. And I don't know what to say to him, and mind you, I had just met JFK Jr. like a few years earlier. The person that I'm freaking out about and just being totally tongue-tied with is Tom Snyder. So I never got to say a single word to him. But one of the things that I don't remember if I mentioned it in the book, I think I did, is I was able to overhear him talking to his date. And after Keith performed his song, Take It So Hard, Tom Snyder turns to his date and he says, now he's the naughty one, right? He vaguely knew who Keith was, was a member of that band, but he's the naughty one, right?
And there's another chapter in the book, which is just like so relevant these days too, with DT45. And yeah, Donald.
I mean, that real estate developer who...
Yeah, that guy that owned a casino, the guy that's been bankrupt 4 times, that guy, the insurrectionist.
Well,
okay, I'll stop it there.
Well, no, as a New Yorker, I'm familiar with this guy for, 4 decades or more, about 4 decades. Right. But, so then he crosses paths with the Stones in 1989 because they were looking for a small venue to do their pay-per-view concert in. And, and they're taking bids again, and, who can offer a venue that's like close to where the Stones want to be and where they can have a hotel that's close to the venue and all that. So Trump steps in and offers them $2 million per show times 3 shows. So a total of $6 million, which of course by today's standards is nothing. But if you have a guarantee, back then in 1989, when the Stones, by the way, were charging just $30 a ticket.
God.
And we were all complaining back then.
I'm still complaining. Today's prices.
$30 a ticket for every show on that tour. And the Steel Wheels tour was just $30 for stadiums. So then they decide to sign on the dotted line with Trump for $2 million a show. And then he gets to set the prices. And he sets them at like $250, which was like the highest priced concert ticket of all time. And mind you, he gave away a bunch to his high rollers, which is why he did. It was just like a feather in his cap. I got the Stones to play at the convention center, and then he starts putting out this word that the Stones are staying at his hotel, at Trump Hotel and Casino, which they had never told him they would. Wow. And then once he starts telling the media that he's going to host the Stones at the hotel, in addition to the convention center for their concerts, the Stones are like, now we are definitely not staying at his hotel. And so they stayed at some other place at like another town close to Atlantic City. But they wanted nothing to do with him. And they do a press conference for the pay-per-view. And I think this is a story that Keith tells in his book. And of course, Keith, I love him, but he does embellish some of his stories. So there's a story where, like, he was going to go after Trump with a knife and all that. And I don't know if any of that part of the story is true. But what I do know and what I remember at the time is that they did say, like, if Trump comes anywhere near us in this room, we're leaving. And, and whatever. that's the part of the story I can definitely confirm. And I know, like, Trump in one of his books, he has his take on the story and all that.
Speaking of embellishing.
That guy, no. But right, so they do the 3 concerts, and at the first one, and I wrote about it in the fanzine, like the whole front section, priced at $250, is all his high rollers that he gave the tickets away for free. And they are people, like blue-haired old ladies, and they are literally walking out of the show, like after the first song or two, because it's too loud and they have their hands over their ears. And it's like, but they came to the show because it was like the place to be. And because Donald gave us these tickets that say $250 on them. And I just felt so bad for the fans who would have loved to have those seats, or even just to get in there, because the place only held 16,000, which was a small show compared to what the Stones were doing. That tour was all 50,000 seat stadium. So I have a whole chapter about that, and I also have a photo in that chapter of the Stones at their press conference, which, like, they didn't even want to be on any Trump property, and they all look miserable in the photo. But anyway, that's it. That's the opinion of the Rolling Stones. The author reserves his opinion on Trump.
At the beginning of the book, you talk about going to a party. It was either at Ron or at Keith's, I think, and one of the security guards tells you it's better to leave before you're asked to leave. And I'm wondering, through this whole time that you're with the band for these many years, how many times did you think about, I need to leave, I need to get out of this, it's too much control over me, even though I'm not even really a paid, I'm not really not getting paid for anything. How many times did you think about, I need to step away from this?
Well, certainly by the 1990s, I started to think about it. So I'm about to turn 60. So in 1992, towards the end of 92, I turned 30 years old. And, you're still young, but at that point, you do start to think about your life and what you've done to this point and where you're going. So I do start thinking about, like, leaving it all behind. So that's in the broader spectrum. But then I do talk about certain, like, actual nights or mornings where I do think like, hey, it's better to get out now before things get funky. Because the story you're referring to is, so it wasn't a security guard for the Stones. It was actually Keith Richards's pharmacist, who I have a whole story about in the book. Who I'm still in touch with, by the way. He was also a Talmudic scholar, but that's besides the point. But so he comes up to me at Ron Wood's house, early on when I'm starting to hang out with the Stones. He comes up to me at it wasn't even really a party. It was just a hangout at Woody's house. And like Matt Dillon, the actor, is there. And Peter Max, the artist, is there. And like all these other people. And then some really shady characters are there. And he pulls me aside, Keith Richards, pharmacist, and says, hey, Bill, just want to let you know, when it comes to the Stones, it's better to leave too early than too late. Because inevitably, by 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, something can go awry and get hairy, and someone breaks something intentionally or unintentionally, and people are too drunk or too stoned. And and an accounting is done of like who was there at that time. So I always made sure, not always, but most of the time, made sure to get out before things got hairy. If it was in one of those big party or large hangout situations, and I have like a chapter in the book where I talk about a night at the Beverly Hills Four Seasons where Harry Dean Stanton is hanging out. Right after the Stones came off stage at the Rose Bowl. I go back to Woody's room, and it's me and Woody and his wife and Harry Dean Stanton and Sean Penn and a few other folks. And at around like 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, I go up to Woody and say, hey, I'm going to leave. And he's like, why so early? Where are you going? It's like 8
just
o'clock.
Getting started.
Yeah, right. They're just getting started.
That's funny.
That also at that time you were still doing the job of getting the newspaper out in a lot of those times. And it's like, how did this guy exist? I mean, because you didn't sleep a lot.
Really?
It was just like, oh my God, he's leaving at like 4 a.m.
He was young.
I know, but
honestly,
still.
that is what it is. I was going on adrenaline and really no drugs. I didn't even drink coffee back then. I do now, but I didn't even drink coffee. I didn't smoke cigarettes. So there was like no caffeine or anything in my system, just pure adrenaline, as corny as that sounds. It was just like desire and this sense of responsibility that my subscribers are paying me, not a lot of money, but they are paying me and I owe them, and I'm their link to the Rolling Stones, and I never forgot that. That's just me. I was given this great sense of responsibility. It kind of gets to what we were saying earlier about the drugs and all that. And I said that I came from a family, I guess that was just, my dad was like a super responsible guy. And I talk about him in the book too. And I have a story about my mother and father meeting Keith. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff.
Responsible guy. And I think I learned from example.
It's just such a wonderful book. I mean, we don't probably have enough time to get into it. Plus, I want people to go out and get the book. And you're doing something special, I believe. Is it Book Soup that you're doing it?
No, not Book Soup, but I am on Sunset Boulevard. I'm going to be at Mr. Music Head.
Okay.
The art gallery on Sunset. And that is on October 15th, Saturday afternoon, October 15th. And it's actually a ticketed event that comes with a copy of the book. And so you can go to their website, or you can go to my website also, billgerman.com, or you can friend me on Facebook, and I respond to everybody. I'm really good with staying in touch.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So you can go get that book signed, and then I think you're going to have artwork and stuff like that too, or something else is going to be there.
The place is an art gallery, and so they will have like photos of the Stones on the walls, I guess for sale, by famous photographers, Jim Marshall or Bob Gruen and people, all the great classic Stones photos will be on the wall. So it's kind of like a photo exhibit. And then I will be, telling all my Stone story. Well, not all, but And then, I'll just be mingling. I know they're going to have refreshments and all that. And I'm doing this in a few other cities too, Chicago and Philadelphia. So like I said, you could check my website for the dates or, my Facebook page. But yes, I know you guys are associated with Los Angeles. And so you have a lot of listeners. And so, yes, I'll be on Sunset October 15th.
And we'll put it on our website along with links to your website and any social media that you'd like to get plugged on there. We'll put that up on there also.
Great.
So, quick bonus round, Rita?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Bill, we're going to do the bonus round. Just some real quick questions. We've tailored all these. Normally we ask these very generically to when we have artists on, but we're going to kind of tailor most of these to the Rolling Stones.
Okay.
What was your worst Rolling Stone experience?
I guess it was when Mick chewed me out for something that I wrote in the fanzine. It had to do with Live Aid, where I said, and it was my opinion based on facts, that the only reason that Mick and then Keith and Woody with Dylan played at Live Aid was out of emotional blackmail. The Five Stones had agreed not to go anywhere near Live Aid.
Right.
And then all these other bands started to, say that they were going to reunite for Live Aid. So you had Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And so wait, the only band that doesn't care about the starving kids in Ethiopia are the Stones, And so I think they kind of got emotionally blackmailed into it, especially when Bill Graham, the promoter of the show, started saying, oh yeah, the Stones are going to be there. And then they couldn't back out. So I put that into the fanzine. And the next time I see Mick, which was in Ronnie Wood's basement, and at one point it's just me and Mick alone in the basement because Woody had to leave the room. And Mick charges towards me and says, I don't like what you wrote. I don't like it. It's not true. How dare you? How dare you say it was emotional blackmail? Not emotional blackmail at all. How dare you? How dare you? And he just came at me. And it was pretty scary. I was 23 years old and I'm getting chewed out by one of my favorite rock stars. So I guess that was probably my worst moment.
God.
You went on so many excursions with the Stones. They didn't pay for any of that. I mean, you fronted all of that, your tickets and everything like that. So I imagine just all the time being around them, you've got some great memorabilia. What's your favorite piece of Rolling Stones memorabilia that you have?
So in the epilogue chapter of the book, I forget what page it is, but there is a drawing that Ronnie Wood did of me for my farewell issue of the fanzine. And he did it in 1996 when I was wrapping up the fanzine. And he had promised me that he was going to ship it to me from London to New York. And it never happened. And
surprise.
Right. I mean, so irresponsible. Anyway, opposites attract, I guess. I'm the responsible one and they're irresponsible. But he promised me he would send it to me. Days go by, weeks go by, months go by, years go by. And I stopped bothering him whatever, that's it. It's lost. I mean, that's what happens with this guy. Things just get lost. Well, it turns out in 2015, I get an email from an avid Stones collector, the biggest Stones collector in the world now. He's actually in the Guinness Book of World Records for having the largest Rolling Stones collection. And he's just opened a museum in London. Anyway, he comes across it. He doesn't tell me where he found it or where it had been since 1996. But long story short, through a trade, I wind up getting this piece of memorabilia. And like I said, it's a drawing that Ronnie Wood did of me. It's in the book, albeit in black and white, which is how it was faxed to me. They faxed it to me in 1996 so that it could appear in my final issue of my fanzine. I had no idea until I got it in person that it has color in it, that Ronnie Wood drew me holding a banana. And so he does a yellow banana. And I'm walking through a puddle. And so the puddle is blue. I was I had no idea about this until, 7 years ago, even though this thing was done 26 years ago. So anyway, that's my favorite piece of memorabilia.
God, the curiosity of where that's been this time, man, that's got to kill you.
Right. I have no idea where. And the collector that found it won't tell me where he found it. So,
or stole it.
Oh, yeah. Who knows? Who knows?
Who would be the ultimate musician to interview for you? It doesn't have to be Rolling Stone, or it can be.
So like the older I get, as much as I love the Stones, there are other groups, a lot of whom I got introduced to through the Stones. I became a Chuck Berry fan through the Stones and Muddy Waters and Bo Diddley and all that. But, then there are people that I just came to on my own as an old white guy. And so like Leonard Cohen, I mean, obviously it's impossible to interview him now, but I would have to say that Leonard Cohen is up there of one of my all-time favorite concerts. I saw him like 15 years ago or so. So someone like that, I have a great respect for, or Tom Waits, I guess, who is still around and could still be interviewed. So yeah, someone like that, I would say.
Okay.
This is not a short question, but it's one I was really interested about because you became a fan after this gentleman passed away, and that is Brian Jones. What impact do you think he would have made on the Stones, on the band, had he not died and had he not left or been kicked out of the band?
He was such a versatile musician that, he would have really affected their sound, obviously, with all kinds of different instrumentation. It's really hard to say, exactly what, but the fact that there's like flute and harpsichord on some of the stuff that he was around for. So you can only imagine where he would have taken that in the 70s and 80s. And then once I guess synthesizers, really became popular, what would he have done with that? I don't know. It's really a good hypothetical. But right. I mean, I became a fan after he was already gone. So I don't have any like direct connection to him. And, the interesting thing is during all my times hanging out with the Stones, like his name almost never came up. Yeah.
And he was the first original one, right? And Ian was the second?
Exactly. Yeah, right. That's one of the things that is mentioned in my interview with Stu, which is reprinted in the new edition of my book, is, that Ian Stewart was nicknamed the Sixth Stone. But chronologically speaking, he was the second Stone. He and Brian Jones, it was Brian's band. The two of them auditioned all the others. So yeah. And, it just occurred to me that the one time that Keith did discuss Brian Jones with me was when he and I were talking about John Belushi. And he said that John Belushi reminded him of Brian Jones in that they had an insatiable appetite for everything. And that Keith said he kind of knew it would not end well with Belushi the same way it did not end well with Brian. But what Keith said was that the more you would tell someone like Brian or Belushi not to overdo it, the more they would overdo it. Mm-hmm. And that's how we got to the point that they came to,
Wow.
What are you doing now?
So I am working on another book. It's a memoir that's based around my family, but it takes place in the late 70s and early 80s. And so it ties in the New York City music scene of what was going on. I caught like the tail end of Max's, and CBGBs and all that. And I got to meet the Ramones also while I was a Stones fan.
Nice.
And so, you never know how things could have turned out differently, or if I had done a Ramones fanzine. So the book is about that. And, it has a whole like arc that involves my family and all that, which I won't.
Are you going to talk about the aunt that was a nun? Or no, wait, she was very religious, but then she became...
She wasn't religious, but I do refer to her as like a nice Jewish aunt.
Nice Jewish aunt, okay.
But she turned into an S&M dominatrix. She's now deceased, but so we'll talk about her. She took me to my very first concert ever when I was 12 years old, and that was Ike and Tina Turner.
Yeah.
Wow.
Who played on the back of a truck at the Monticello Raceway in upstate New York before the horse races.
Love that.
But that was my first ever concert. I think about some kids today who say like their first concert was, I don't know, the Spice Girls, or I don't know. I guess I'm dating myself, but I do think that it's pretty cool to say, "Hey, my first concert was Ike and Tina."
That's very cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many great things, so many things to ask you about. And also real quickly, you did some stuff with KLOS for many years. You were like guested on our broadcasts up at the Coliseum, I think it was.
Exactly.
Steel Wheels Tour.
Steel Wheels Tour.
Yeah, I did a couple nights. One night with Uncle Joe Benson.
Yeah.
Another night with Gail Murphy and Steve Downs. And then, I used to do the Power Cuts show, which I know you would sometimes sub for Gino. I would do like a Rolling Stones report. So yeah, I was a
Rockline.
Rockline.
Oh, well, you weren't on Rockline, but you were there with the members while in New York.
And I loved some reading in the book about Mark Felsot, who is the producer of Rockline, and you had to hear what the band did, or did you see the band do that?
I did not see that. I don't know if we can talk about it. Company, but yes, right. So I was in the studio here in New York when Gino was out there in LA, and not Gino, I mean
Bob Coburn.
Bob Coburn.
Yes, was out there in LA, and so right, I was on the New York side of things when Keith did Rockline, and when Woody and Rod Stewart did Rockline, and that's the story you're referring to. When Woody and Rod carved something very obscene into the console of ABC Studios here.
Oh my God!
And also, another quick little story was that when Keith was on, I hope Rick Nielsen is not listening, but.
Well, you write about this in the book, so
I do.
If he's not listening, he might read it.
Right, and I'm a big Cheap Trick fan. Actually, I always have been. But at some point, when Keith is on Rockline, this is in 1992, when his Main Offender album came out. He's being interviewed by Bob Coburn, who's in LA, and so all the fans are calling in, and then they say, "Okay, we have this other fan." Obviously it was all predetermined. And it's Rick Nielsen, and he calls up, and he heaps all this praise onto Keith. You're my guitar idol, et cetera, very understandable. And then it goes to commercial, and Keith is like, no idea who the hell that was. Me and the engineers, like, the guy that wears the baseball cap, and Keith had
black and white checkers.
Right. And
Mommy's all right, Daddy's all right.
Physically and all that, and Keith has no idea. But that's Keith, and as I point out in the book, if you're not like some dead, old, blind black blues guy from the Mississippi Delta, Keith has no need for you. More or less. I don't say that's an absolute, but pretty much. Anybody that came after Keith, he doesn't, I don't want to say he doesn't have respect for, but, he doesn't idolize, let's say, or pay that much attention to.
Right.
Is Keith your favorite?
I would say so. Yeah. Musically, from a musical point of view, and then just as the rebel and all that. And, as this innocent kid, I was able to live vicariously through Keith, the bad boy, and, and all the stuff that he did in his life. I would say he's my favorite, but I love them all.
Yeah, exactly. But they all, made such a, just an amazing impact on all of our lives, on society, on music. I couldn't imagine the world without the Rolling Stones.
Still doing it.
Yeah, still doing it.
Yeah.
Again, the book, Under Their Thumb by Bill German. How a nice boy from Brooklyn got mixed up with the Rolling Stones and lived to tell about it.
And I got to say, being ADD and dyslexic, I really appreciated the short chapters and getting right to the point, because it is very difficult for me to read books, and some books are just like go on and on and on. And this, like every chapter was like, bam, 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 right to the point, simple to read, very easy. And it's still a nice 400-page book, but it's got plenty of different great stories and fun anecdotes in there. So
if you're a Stones fan of whatever kind, definitely read it. And if you're a fan of just your favorite band, what it would be like to be around them all the time. This is just such a great book about that. So thank you so much for writing that and for being our guest today.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for having me on.
Yeah.
Excellent. We hope to see you October 15th.
I hope so. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
See ya.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
CW, thank you, Rita.
I thoroughly enjoyed that. I hope you did too.
I did. It was cool. And, and I'm just impressed that the Rolling Stones, putting Bill aside for a moment, the Rolling Stones have been around for 60 years.
I know. That's amazing. And everybody thought, just a couple of years. And then, all those bands of that generation that were still together and still making music got lucky, because that's when somebody termed the phrase classic rock, and then it became classic rock radio and classic rock tours, and all these guys were touring. But that was 80s, and so it's still 40 years after that. They're still doing amazing things.
Yeah. And like I said in the interview, it's a great book. It was very easy read for me, which I appreciate. And it's available at Amazon. So I want to thank Bill for zooming with us all the way from New York. And check out Bill's website at billgerman.com, or social media. His Facebook is BillGerman7, the number 7.
Number 7. Bill's going to be at Mr. Music Head on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles on October 15th for a lecture and signing. For more information, go to musichead.com. And some of the other appearances include Rattleback Records in Chicago, if you're listening in Chicago. I know some people do. And October 22nd at Pulp in Asbury Park, New Jersey. I should be there for that.
You should be. Maybe Bruce will be there.
Yeah.
Also, check out our show notes on our website at rockandrollconfessional.rocks. There you can find links to some of the subjects we talked about in today's show, along with ordering the book and some nice little archival videos that we found about Bill and also on the Rolling Stones. Make sure you support the podcast by subscribing wherever you can. Write a review if you can. If it's available, just say, Read It Wild is awesome. And then follow and comment on Instagram, Facebook, wherever you can. Share your posts with your friends. We'd appreciate that, as always.
It's a duo show, so I'll say also CW is awesome.
Oh,
too,
yeah,
please.
I forgot.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Bill German, and thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, CW, for all you do.
Thank you, Rita Wild, and everybody have a nice week and day and month, and we'll see you soon. Okay, bye.